It says, all right, so we may just have to upload this later if it doesn't work, but
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I prepared a little statement here to introduce our speaker today, Johannon Ben Zion. The U.S. Transhumanist Party was founded in 2015 by Zoltan Istvan to put science and technology at the forefront of U.S. politics. Unfortunately, science and technology, the core driver of social change, has been drowned out in the current political discourse. The major parties are primarily focused on cults of personality and attacking their political rivals. In addition, Trump's ongoing stream of childish antics and scandals sucks the air out of the room and dominates the mainstream media. Meanwhile, the implications of transformational technologies are being left on the wayside. We are living in an era of transformational exponential technologies. The effects of these technologies, such as AI, blockchain, and anti-aging medicine, are affecting every facet of society and changing the very nature of humanity itself. We are living in crunch time for humanity. The next few decades will determine if we can improve ourselves and expand the light of consciousness out into the universe, or whether we will destroy ourselves with climate change, runaway AI, and designer pandemics. As an example, Eliezer Yudkowsky says in his Twitter profile, "Ours is the era of inadequate AI alignment. Any other facts about this era are relatively unimportant." Thus, the role of the U.S. Transhumanist Party has never been more vital. Since this spring, Johannon Ben Zion has been campaigning tirelessly on behalf of the USTP, promoting his techno-progressive policy agenda. He has interviewed over 50 futurists and transhumanists on his Futurist New Deal podcast. Last month, he was elected as the party's nominee, and he is now embarking on a national tour to promote his platform. So, without further ado, I present Johannon Ben Zion.
Thank you, Dr. Dan Elton. It's really good to be here, and it's really good to be here, and I'm pleased to introduce the Futurist New Deal for America. My name is Johannon Ben Zion. I am the United States presidential candidate, the United States Transhumanist Party presidential candidate for 2020. And tell me if I switch to laps off screen. How much?
No, you're good. You're good.
Yeah. Okay. I am the United States Transhumanists Party presidential candidate for 2020. And the Futurist New Deal is the name of my platform, and our slogan is "Radical Life Extension is closer than you think." There were a couple of people in this primary that Dan mentioned who had some slogans that referenced life extension in some way. They tended to have policies that were not exactly pro-life extension. But we had an interesting time and an exciting time with this primary. I don't know how many of you guys were following it, but it was a raucous affair. And I'm going to talk about that very briefly for a moment. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about this article that came out just a few days ago on the 16th in Medium Magazine. And this article described this primary in some detail. It described some of our debate events. And Alex Perlman, I think, wrote a very fun and wonderful piece here. You should definitely check it out. Would you vote for a president who promised eternal life as a subject? And actually, when it was first published, it was something to the effect of, why settle for Medicare for all when you can have immortality for all? Put that in air quotes. And which is, I think, a pretty good talking point. We're going to reference that a little bit later here. But this event, these debates and the events surrounding this primary were a lot of fun for me. We talked a little bit about Zoltan. Zoltan is the founder of the United States Transhumanist Party, and he founded this organization almost 5 years ago to the day. Our 5-year anniversary was on the 7th of November, so just about a week or so passed. And here he is. You might recall that he toured around the United States similarly in the Immortality Bus, a word that we're tending to use a little bit less now under the new chairman. And this is a piece in the New York Times Magazine. He got some incredible press. You probably were following that. And it really was a tremendous thing that he did. We were talking about this picture before. Here he is. This maybe is a cautionary tale also. Try and use studio photography whenever possible. You see Ubermensch here. And, but here he is with John McAfee. He's now more closely associated with the Libertarian Party. And so he's actually friends with Gary Johnson. And I was lucky enough to interview some Libertarian Party presidential candidates. I'm going to show you a picture of one of them in a moment. I haven't met John McAfee, the international man of mystery, but so you can see the immortality bus traveling around the United States. We had a lot of fun with that. Alex Perlman was embedded with him for a few days on that tour. A little bit of information about the Transhumanist Party. I would very much urge you to check out transhumanist-party.org and have a look at some of the elements of our platform if you're not familiar. Have a look at some of the people who are involved, and certainly find your state's Transhumanist Party organization. If it doesn't have one, I suggest you start one. We know here in DC we have a very active chapter going back many years. So the United States Transhumanist Party platform, as described, is distinct from the Futurist New Deal platform. But I'd like to just quickly read these bullet points. We want to compare and contrast this to some degree. Technological advocacy and policies for achieving longevity. That is really our core value. But all of these things are extremely important. We focus on civil liberties and individual freedom, rights and well-being of sentient entities, including ultimately AI, which may or may not have quality in the future, addressing existential risks, rationality in education, reforming political processes, and improving governmental accountability, economic and fiscal policy, international initiatives, and technological solution to social issues. You can go to that same site, transhumanist-party.org/platform, and examine these at greater length. And a little bit more about this primary election. We were here at this wonderful event just slightly more than a week past, RADFest. I don't know how many of you have heard of RADFest. Yeah. RAD, in this case, stands for Revolution Against Aging and Death. And it's a get-together of life extensionists and really a wonderful time, incredible presentations, some cutting-edge medical researchers, cutting-edge artificial intelligence researchers. I was really pleased to see Ben Goertzel and Ray Kurzweil, Aubrey de Grey, all of these folks presenting, and I got to talk with them. Ray Kurzweil presented remotely, but he gave a tremendous talk. And RADFest, it really was a nice time. It was where we, Gennady Stolyarov, who's the chairman of the United States Transhumanist Party, this is where we announced the results of this primary election. And also it's where we announced my running mate, Charlie Kam, who is a well-known figure to RADFest attendees and been very active in transhumanism for many years. He's also recently started the Institute to Expedite the Singularity, a really incredible undertaking that he is working on. And these were the other candidates who participated officially. And I just want to say a word or two about some of these folks. I just had breakfast with John Kerks here in Washington yesterday morning. And he is also our aeronautics and space advisor to the Futurist New Deal for America. He is also an energy advisor to the Futurist New Deal for America. A number of these people I've cultivated close dealings with. Kimberly Forsyth worked closely with throughout the primary. She remains an advisor and dear friend. Also working closely with Charles Holsapple and his Project 222, an undertaking of a philanthropic nature in order to achieve something like life extension, a universal longevity escape velocity, I think something that many people in this room probably hope for. In order to do that on a global scale, we want to see that people are elevated the world around. and he's really working on this a wonderful project to see that people's needs are met. A tremendous undertaking. Also, Matt Taylor and Kriston Harris, I've continued to work closely with. But it was really a wonderful group, and we had a really nice time.
What about Rachel Haywire?
What would you like to know? A lovely woman. Yeah.
Well, are you still working with her?
No, not so directly. We might go on the Rundown Live on Wednesday. It's a very distinct possibility that we will go on a little chat show together. But yes, you may recall Rachel Haywire was second place in this event, and she is still, I believe, continuing her campaign as an independent, although she's not endorsed by the Transhumanist Party. And she's had a lot of choice words to say about the Transhumanist Party. Not so many words to say about policy, in my view. But everybody who's participated in this, and this is something that Zoltan said at the beginning of this. You're putting something of yourself out there, and you're putting and you're really getting the message out for life extension. So whatever way you choose to do that, Rachel Haywire has been a colorful personality. This gentleman campaigned on having alien ancestry, being part space alien, and an interesting choice. But it's still doing something on behalf of our community, and I have to laud folks for that. And I think this is really the thing that unifies all of us. Techno-progress and human development are what are bringing us all together. So this is the Steel Archer Show. This is our primary media partner. And this was, I think, I'd like to get some of your opinions on this subject after we finish. This was a panel discussion that Steele and I put together. This is Daniel Hornell, a constitutional scholar. Jason Mallory, a public and private sector advocate for humane economic policies. This is Irai Ozkarol, a virtuoso computer scientist, AI guy, and myself. And we were talking at this particular event about the legality and constitutionality of algocracy, AI-run governance. A really tremendous talk. And we put together a number of panels of this kind, on different subjects, including a few others on advanced algorithms. And we really I would encourage you to check out the Detonation channel on YouTube, subscribe to that, and also check out the Steel Archer Show. I'd also encourage you to please check out the Futurist New Deal podcast on YouTube. We just moved over to a new channel, so we want to get those subscribers back up. So like and subscribe to all of those as you have the time. Had some really incredible opportunities to interview some folks. Very briefly, this gentleman is named Florian Marcus. We both look quite happy in this picture. And this gentleman is an Estonian e-governance emissary. He was kind enough to speak to me, and we talked a little bit about the high level of digitalization that has occurred in this country. Really incredible the extent to which they have an iVoting system is now open to all voters. 55% of those voters are using that system. They're voting from their desktop. They're having a two-factor authentication from their smartphone. And it's basically foolproof. And this kind of system, once this infrastructure is in place, it costs pennies on the dollar compared to what all of the voting infrastructure that we have of a physical kind. And so many good things are being done in this kind of e-governance and digitalization. So many high-level services and e-services are being provided that, in fact, they are now able to be incorporating data science and preventative medicine, things like Senolytics, and into their public health service. And ultimately, this will lead to countries like this, it's a relatively small country, but very soon lead to countries like this being able to have an anti-aging public health service.
What is Senolytics again?
Yes. So Senolytics is a feature of genomics that is focused on the senescence of cells, so preventing the aging of cells through preventative medicine. Yes. And this Senolytics and all of these things, an exciting prospect. You can imagine a small country like this, or my friend Paul Spiegel, also working in this capacity in San Marino. If a small country achieves something remotely like this, becomes a nation of life extensionists, the whole world will stand up and take notice. We will have, I think it's an opportunity for us to leapfrog towards radical life extension and a universal longevity escape philosophy. And Florian Marcus had some incredible insights. I've been very honored to have these opportunities. This is maybe a controversial kind of notion. This idea that an AI takeoff around 2045, it portends many changes for our society. One of those changes that would probably precede that would be something like an algocracy, maybe coming before 2045, an AI-driven governance. And but many people in our community who believe in this takeoff, they don't want to talk about algocracy. They seem to have a lot of hang-ups that might prevent them from having this kind of discussion. And this is something, when we're talking about our friend Ray Kurzweil, effectively the father of modern 21st century transhumanism, he says that we have 1,000 years of history compressed into 1 year potentially in the coming years. That's not an easy thing to do. If we're to survive something like that, we have to have a kind of a plasticity in our thinking. It's very good to understand every political philosophy, understand every philosophy, but my feeling is that if we want to have that 1,000 years of history in 1 year and adapt to that in the best possible way, we should strive to have no ideology. And I think that certainly colors people's thinkings, their existing ideologies, when thinking about governance, when thinking about new economic theories, and things of this kind. Here's Dr. Dan Elton, your friend and mine. And last night, Dr. Dan and I were on the aforementioned Steel Archer show. And Dr. Dan has agreed to be the AI advisor to the Futurist New Deal for America. He is part of our advisory council. And we had a wonderful chat. I would encourage you to check that out. We talked at some length about best practices for AI safety and making the best use of AI. Surviving that 1,000 years in 1 year. It's not just about safety. It's also about making the best use of these incredible tools. Here's Ira Pastor. This is a man who knows almost as much as anyone alive about life extension, I believe. And that's also owing to the fact that he has an Idea Me show, which is an incredible resource for a discussion of various things about a life extension. And he's really someone who is making some bold choices in that area. He's discussing mainstream medical research, but also as an investor and as an entrepreneur and as a presenter, describing ideas that are even more exciting than that. This is one of my heroes who I got to speak to, Isaac Arthur of the Science and Futurism podcast. That was a real honor. We had a wonderful chat about metaverse concepts. This man, I think, probably needs a little introduction to this crowd, Dr. Jose Cordero. He was also one of the presenters and organizers of so many events, including RadFest that we mentioned. And I was humbled to have a chance to speak with him. He was kind enough to say some good words about the Futurist New Deal for America at a critical time, and that support from folks like him and some of these others, Charlie Cam, was very instrumental in getting us all through this primary. This is a libertarian who I mentioned. I did some cross-party debates. This is a libertarian presidential candidate. I interviewed 3 libertarian presidential candidates, Adam Kokesh, Arvin Vohra, Dan Berman. Also did some cross-party debates with Green presidential candidate, and Dan Berman. You might imagine that he is a libertarian hardliner, but in fact he is someone who is also what I would describe as a new libertarian, who may be familiar with that term, because he is very interested in tech policy, and it is a feature of the Futurist New Deal, an interest in e-governance. It's number 2 on the list, really. And this is a guy who is working on applications of a decentralized kind towards a better governance. I'm very wary, personally, of libertarians who are not open to the concept of e-governance. I think that it is the shortest distance to a more libertarian society, a more fully voluntarist and decentralized society. And gentlemen like this, why I would tend to put him on the slideshow and not Adam Kokesh is because I think he is very much thinking in those terms as a new libertarian. So we had the conclusion of our primary. Maybe I was the dog who caught the fire truck. Some more famous people in this race. They did kind of cancel each other out. And I'm very pleased to accept this burden. So a little bit now about the Futurist New Deal. I've already alluded to this. The Futurist New Deal is a reform ticket, but it is focused on setting the stage for a society that can transition to post-industrialization in a more fully realized way. And I think the thing that tends to unite futurists, universal longevity, escape velocity. It's not something that's going to necessarily happen as a matter of course on the timescale that we would prefer. We have to organize our civil society and organize within these institutions like the United States Transhumanist Party to see that happens. And I'd like to describe some of the ways that we have attempted to do that. Now, we know Zoltan Istvan. Here's his book. If you haven't had a chance to look at this book, it just came out. I would encourage you to pick it up. It's an incredible collection of his writings describing many of the ideas that have become mainstream in politics today. And one of those ideas here is universal basic income. It's now effectively Democratic Party doctrine. That no fewer than five presidential candidates from the Democratic Party are considering a UBI. One of them is running as a one-issue candidate, Andrew Yang. And I say one issue, I don't mean to use that term derisively.
He's not one issue.
Yeah, no, he's certainly not one issue, but
He's very technology oriented.
Yes, that is true.
So,
that is
so
true.
That's actually it's very connected to your idea about futures, like e-governance
Yes.
is the future to go.
I think he's a transhumanist. Do you?
Yeah. He probably didn't know about it, but he should know.
Yes. Well, he does. I spoke to a friend just last night, who I'll mention later, another Dan, Daniel Yelishvili, and he talked to Andrew Yang, and Andrew Yang told him that Zoltan Istvan's basic income inspired him quite directly. I'm sure this idea did not originate with Zoltan Istvan. The basic idea goes back many hundreds of years, in fact. But the federal land dividend did originate with our friend Zoltan, and the federal land dividend is also a feature of the Futurist New Deal for America. And that is a basic income, a middle-class basic income for everyone age 18 to 63. But of course, we have many, many policies. This is a first draft describing some of those policies, a collection of pamphlets on the Futurist New Deal for America. I'll quickly describe a few of these ideas now. Sort of in order of importance, if you will. I mentioned a basic income, middle-class basic income funded through the leasing of federal lands to carbon-neutral corporations and organizations. We also want to emphasize that indefinite life extension for all is extremely important, and we want to find ways in talking about something like this San Marino and Estonia model for a public health service. So there's something that people don't always intuitively realize. In the United States, we spend many, many trillions of dollars on what is effectively end-of-life care. Now, we don't want to begrudge those people. We don't want to begrudge grandma this health care. But as we are able to shift those trillions of dollars to preventative medicine, to maintenance-based approaches, we can save a lot of money and also have a society that has not just public health outcomes that are very good by the standards of today, but by the standards of tomorrow as well, leading to indefinite life extension. And that is an exciting prospect. I hope that we will have the political will to see that comes to pass as soon as possible. I mentioned a basic income. I have mentioned these e-governance. This is an e-governance ticket. And I-voting, blockchain secured voting for all citizens, access for all citizens, as per the Estonia model, is a top priority of the Futurist New Deal. I'll call back a few other of these notions a little bit later. But yes, a blockchain voting option in every state, e-governance and e-services and portals of this kind is a top priority. Yes, sir.
What problems in voting security do you think that blockchain solves?
Yes. Well, if we look at some of these concerns, when we talk about cybersecurity concerns in blockchain, I would consider these relatively low probability events relative to this political corruption that's described here and a little bit here. Citizens United, removing dark money from politics. We have a system in the United States where voter suppression is quite popular in the two-party system. It's incredibly commonplace. And this doesn't just lead to institutional corruption, it leads to a kind of ennui. People don't bother to vote because they have no trust in these institutions. And by having by encouraging something like full voter participation with ease of access, and also circumventing these corrupt systems, basically in a word, dark money, this is a very good solution to a problem. The cybersecurity concerns are significant, but this is really the elephant in the room, in my view. We, of course, want to have public health initiatives, a public health service, but also a public sector initiatives essential to the Futurist New Deal. As I mentioned, life extension is something that we can achieve in the coming decades, and it's something that we must have the political will to do. I've described some of these outcomes already. So I mentioned this also, the Futurist New Deal was devised to set the stage for a country that can support a longevity escape velocity. And here I'm getting pushed into a swimming pool in my suit. A strange turn of events. Working, what does this say? Yes, working towards benevolent AI for all. This is an important feature. There's no sector of the modern world that's not affected by advanced algorithms. It's a driver of all of these things. We wouldn't have the kinds of breakthroughs where we're seeing cures for sickle cell anemia. There's a man who was cured of sickle cell anemia a few days ago. So people have been cured of the HIV virus. We wouldn't see this. We wouldn't see any of the benefits of the post-CRISPR world without data science and advanced technology of this kind. So there's no discipline or facet of the marketplace or a facet of government that's not driven by advanced algorithms. And it's why I would again encourage you to watch these many talks on AI policy, including the one from last night. Maybe this might seem a bit of a platitude, but it is. Algorithms are a key driver of techno progress, as we mentioned, and this is something that we cannot do without. It's something that we should not undersell or understate. It is what separates, I believe, folks like Andrew Yang and folks like DC Transhumanists from people who are not forward-thinking in this way. A few other points. I won't describe all of these points, but a few other points, and maybe a kind of object lesson about Moore's Law, in a sense. So one thing that we described, I worked very closely with a few people in crafting the Futurist New Deal for America. And so, for example, I worked with a team of folks on this basic income and these other initiatives. One thing that we wanted to describe was data for all as a public good, effectively a civil right. But calling back the Moore's Law thing that I said a moment ago, for us to build a municipal infrastructure that would provide data for all in this way, it would be actually probably a little too slow. Because right now the Musk organization, Google and Amazon, they've launched mini satellites that are going to be broadcasting data for all to folks at a lower cost. So by the time a politician was able to implement such a thing, it might already tend to be somewhat of a moot point. In writing about this, we focused on what these organizations are doing and how we could integrate public-private partnerships with them to facilitate that and to maintain lower and lower costs. Again, all of these things are directly related to advanced algorithms, so we must have a greater investment as a society and in the marketplace in AI. And this is not just a matter of the marketplace, right? We face a critical time in the United States and the world around. If we are not careful about how we deal with advanced algorithms, with post-industrial concerns like joblessness, the robot apocalypse. We could find ourselves in the midst of quite a bit of chaos and civil unrest. So we want to safely transition to a post-industrial society and ultimately a full automation civilization. That's extremely important. And since we are going to the live stream, I have to give a shout out to Poe, my dog. he's people who are watching this online. They are constantly asking me what Poe is doing. So Poe's not here in Washington D.C., but there he is. He's doing well. Everyone say hi to Poe. Here's Liz Parrish of BioViva, who was kind enough to let me interview her, and she has just speaking of bold choices. She is a person who has made an incredible choice. She had the telomerase lengthening procedure done, and she was there was an N of 1, a bit controversial in scientific circles, but it was a success. And actually, just a few days after I interviewed her, there was studies that suggested that the concerns about this telomerase lengthening, these procedures that she'd undergone contributing to cancer, were unfounded. They were largely unfounded. In fact,
How was it done?
how was this telomerase? Well, it was not.
What's the procedure like? Like which part of this? What cells are you changing?
Yes. So we have telomeres.
Yeah.
You might recall Dolly the sheep the cloned sheep had a problem with the length of her telomeres. So if that was contributed to her early death, Dolly the sheep. So lengthening telomeres is something that will potentially have a senolytic effect.
But that was a great question. Which cells?
Like, did she get injected?
It was a whole body gene therapy
Right.
with
Right. Yes. Yes. It was a series of injections that she had outside.
So she get injected of telomerase? Like
she
the
got
enzyme?
injected with the genes that code for telomerase.
Yes.
They're actually like what are they called?
Extensive gene therapy.
So she got the.
It was a series of treatments, actually, 4 or 5.
It's through blood. Through
Yes.
blood?
Yes, it's a gene therapy treatment that she had a series of injections in this way.
Oh.
And look at her; she's beautiful. She's 49 years old. She doesn't look a day over 30.
She's the CEO of that company.
Yes, she is the CEO of BioViva. That's true. Yes.
So that the company does the telomerase injection.
Yes.
It's
I
not
would say-
telomerase itself. I think it's in a gene therapy.
Yes.
Okay.
They inject the
So gene
gene.
therapy target what cells? Like when you can't target every cell
yeah.
in your body, right? So
I'm not exactly sure. You have to look it up, but it's the the DNA. I think that's in a loop. I forget what it's called.
it's the end of the DNA, the telomerase. Like,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yes.
But then
Well, telomeres are the end.
telomere. Yeah.
Telomerase is an
It's an
enzyme
that
that
keep the length.
expands it to allow the cells
And
to
so
live
you
longer.
introduce the gene that makes the telomerase that can
Yes.
extend the telomere, but in which cells? I can't imagine
It's,
how to do it.
but I understand it was a whole. Yeah, you have to look it up. But it was supposed to reach almost all the cells in the body.
Yes. It's
They
it's
threw
gene
essentially
therapy.
some kind of virus like mechanism.
So a little bit of a shift back to what we were discussing before about libertarian ideals. I consider myself a libertarian, and I believe that e-governance is the shortest distance between our statist state of affairs and a more decentralized, voluntarian, libertarian form of government. And I think that bears repeating, folks.
So how far are we from the e-governance? Because in this is not partisan. It's just
That's
somebody
true.
has to tell the government that we have the technology available. You need to adapt it. Like
That's true.
How
In
are
fact-
people doing it?
Well, in fact, I interviewed a gentleman named Max Kay, who founded the Flux Party in Australia, which is a significant organization in that country, and they are also a post-partisan or non-partisan organization for digitalization of government. They don't have any other political agenda except for raising this level of digitalization across the board, because we know every evidence points to the fact that a higher degree of digitalization in any discipline increases.
So right
this
now the only
effectiveness.
limitation is money. Does the government have the money to do it? Because I don't think anyone
And the political
is
will.
against.
Yes.
I don't think anybody is against it. It's just about whether.
Well, if you talk to folks across the political spectrum, you might tend to meet people who are instantly referred to paper ballots in this situation.
Yeah, pretty much the entire corner of the information security community that focuses on election security is pretty anti-e-governance because you don't have a paper trail, and it's really, really difficult to not just know with certainty, but to convince other people with certainty that the tally hasn't been fucked with. And I think the Estonian model is a good one to look at because because a lot of their crypto
They do have that transparency.
Well, actually, they thought they did, and then they found out that that there was a problem with the keys that had been issued, and a huge number of crypto tokens had to be recalled.
But they have not had significant hacking, and they have not had
that we know of.
Yeah, they have not had any real instances of reversing as a result of this. So there's always going to be cybersecurity concerns. The United States is certainly in a position to implement these kinds of things in spite of these cybersecurity concerns. But it is a point. It is a point worth making that there are some. There's still a lot of open questions as to iVoting. And I would encourage you to actually watch that talk also on my channel. I'm not sure if that's up on the Max K talk. It might be only on my Facebook. I'll put it up. You can also find me on Facebook and watch those Max K talk because we talked about at length about these protocols for blockchain voting. There's a lot of people doing good work in that field. So a fascinating thing about the Transhumanist Party, it's kind of proven to be an incubator for new policies. We mentioned how Andrew Yang has become a mainstream politician who's, I do believe, is a transhumanist, certainly to my minimum specifications. But some of these ideas, bright green energy, which came up a lot in the discussion last night with the climate advisor and geoengineering advisor, Daniel Yelishvili, basic income, a whole slate of reforms, now common talking points in policy circles, all began with us, transhumanists, and particularly in DC, you have a very smart organization.
I was going to say, I read something several months ago that Yang was asked about transhumanism. He said he wasn't, but it appeared to me that he was basically basing it on, what's mainstream acceptable. Yeah. And have you heard of the Overton window?
Sure.
Yeah. And so transhumanism is a bit outside that, and he wants to maintain that Overton window, whatever. Yeah. And so I think that's the only real difference. He is, but without the label.
It's a timing.
Yeah.
You're right. It's the ideal incubated here, but when it's time for now, it's time for you to react.
I consider transhumanism to be synonymous with techno-optimism or techno-progressive notions, and I consider almost everybody without fail. I've done this man on the street interview before. I'm going to be doing it in Times Square in a few days. I like to ask folks, do you own a digital device? Oh yeah? You might consider owning another one. Well, you're halfway there. Would you consider going to the doctor in the future if you have some illness? Oh yeah? Well, congratulations, you're a de facto transhumanist. I do think that overwhelmingly describes folks, but there is an idea of transhumanism being rather outside of the Overton window, and we can kind of steer into that. The transhumanist parties, we have 1,900 members in the United States Transhumanist Organization, but yet, my friend Natasha Vitamore of Humanity Plus was saying this at our strategy meeting at RadFest. We have an outsized influence relative to other organizations, partly because of this fascination with this word, transhumanism, partly because of an interest in tech notions and policy, which goes with it. So yes, again, to call back we had an incredible time at RadFest and made some exciting announcements. The Futurist New Deal for America is also it is a reform ticket. We are tending to focus on geoengineering solutions like carbon capture, but we do also want to have regulatory solutions the more mainstream kind as well. And we do also want to be talking about this basic income. This is a crucial part of the messaging of the Futurist New Deal. It's important for folks to be talking about this. It is the way that we are going to survive the coming decades, I do believe. And sometimes folks are saying that this basic income, now this basic income is funded through a novel revenue stream, the federal land dividend, leasing of lands that are already owned in great number by the United States. Only about 15% of those lands are national parks. So the other 85% of those, they could be leased to carbon neutral corporations.
So how much the federal land relative to the private land in this country?
I don't have those
What
figures.
percentage of land is federal land?
I don't have those figures, but it's not. It's a substantial.
Something
percentage.
like 40%.
Yeah,
40% is
yeah,
federal
it's
land?
a substantial percentage.
But a lot of that is like it just desert or in Alaska or something.
Right.
But
yeah.
yeah.
We can still have a specially tiered rollout.
We are working on other funding mechanisms as well, such as moving money out of.
But even by other models, the Yang model, the Haywire model described to some degree in the primary. This is not going to tax the economy, in my view. In 2009, we had a financial crisis. We had a housing collapse, and there was quantitative easing, well in excess of $1 trillion. It did not collapse our fintech-driven economy. It did not even move the needle. So we can afford to do things like this, and from this would derive a great deal of new capacities for working people, pursuing their own small businesses, pursuing their own enrichment, and doing the things that, like Andrew Yang says, the real economy, taking care of loved ones, doing all of these pro-social behaviors that you're doing that you're not really being rewarded for. It is quite sad that we have a civilization, a society that does not function in that way. And I think another important point about the basic income, we are techno-optimists. We tend to believe in things like takeoff effects. And so if we build something like a middle-class basic income, and as a stopgap measure, towards a time when we see these takeoff effects, it will have a stabilizing effect on our civilization. It will stave off this problem of automation removing all of these jobs. 55% of workers in this country are working in artificially low-paying service jobs. And they have artificially high, maybe owing to that quantitative easing to some degree, they have artificially high housing costs, but owing to a number of factors, of course. In the face of this incredible wave of automation and advanced algorithms, in the near term, we face a serious problem. Now, if it proves that we didn't need to do that, if the takeoff comes sooner, then the only thing that we've done is spend a lot of money by the standards of today, which by that marketplace would be really a drop in the bucket. So I don't see any downside to making this choice. I only see an upside, which is safeguarding this struggling middle class here in the United States. This is my friend Charlie Cam. He was the first person to endorse me in this primary. He's been giving me some incredible advice throughout, and we had a nice time. I'd encourage you to watch that show, or we've done any number of interviews since at Radfest and other places. I just wanted to say hello to him because he is my running mate, and we're going to be doing some more press and appearances together quite soon. I'm looking forward to seeing him actually in the coming days. And finally, here's the young man I mentioned, Andrew Yelishvili, our geoengineering advisor. Gennady Stolyarov, I think you know him. The Futurist New Deal for America, it is an innovative set of policies. I look forward to discussing these ideas with you here now in this question and answer section. We do have a website. It's going up. I haven't put it on this slide yet, but you can feel free to email me, all of you. You can give this email to your friends, whoever you like, benzion2020@gmail.com. Here's a few other sites. We have a lot of supporters out there helping to maintain and creating content on those sites. I encourage you to please ask your friends to join the Transhumanist Party and support what we're trying to do. You don't need to wait 4 years for the DNC to co-opt more of our ideas. You can be staying up with what's going on now here in the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Thanks for your time, and I'm looking forward to our discussion session.
All right, great.
No, I'm about
How you doing?
about 10 gigabytes of information I want to share right now. I mean,
Sure.
I'm 41 years old, almost 42. I've been out of work for 8 or 9 years. Employers will basically hang up on me immediately after learning I've been out of work that long. I mean, it's really, it's just monstrous. And I'm a major Trump supporter. I really think that he's doing a very important work. I mean, the most of it, to boil it down to one issue, is you have to look at what the establishment is doing to try to end the Trump presidency. I think that should tell you what the man is having to go through to deal with the corruption that he has found in our government. And I think that that's a very important issue. A lot of what you cover, I mean, like the reason AI isn't, or what you think are important issues are not getting funding is because the monetary system is so broken right now, and it's been broken for 40 years, since before I was born, since we got off the gold standard, and that has created quadrillions of dollars of bogus investments, all of which are in the process of collapsing as we speak. The banks are being banks are getting billions and $100 billion of bailouts as we speak daily, and so yeah, that's. There's so much more I could get into.
Yeah, what's your question? If we have some other questions.
Okay, well maybe I'll
we come back to it.
Yeah,
I like your thoughts. It's truly a sign of the times. So tell me your name.
Hi, I'm George.
Hi, George.
I'm a neckbeard. I work in information security, and a lot of the platform you raised is really right up my alley. But I wonder what might the Transhumanist Party do to appeal more to the female half of the electorate? I noticed that most of the issues up there are a lot more popular with men than they are with women.
Yeah. And it's an interesting question. It really is. I think that focusing on life extension, I haven't seen the numbers, but I think that in the times when Zoltan was campaigning with the immortality bus, that public push, it does tend to drive those numbers more towards the center.
Well, if I may interject, this is also an issue in the Libertarian Party. Libertarian Party is,
I think,
90% men, I would say.
Right.
It's an issue with cryonics. The vast majority of people who've signed up for cryonics are men. And I think part of it is that just there's not enough women role models. So I think that for historical reasons, these communities are mostly male, and there's not enough women involved.
I think
there's no reason that women should be, not interested in these ideas. In fact,
I think that a certain level of political disenfranchisement, it seems to skew towards men, and it always, to me, comes down to economic concerns. We already live in this world where the middle class is struggling. Men are kind of untethered. We see that across the political spectrum in the United States, and that leads to certain kinds of political ecosystems, if you will. I think that is also very much a driver of why there's so many more men in third parties than women.
Do you have women in your focus groups or something when you're developing these platforms and the presentation thereof?
Yes. Quite a lot of my advisors and close cohorts are women. We that is. Yeah.
Well, we have Natasha Vita Moore is the
Delphine.
chair of Humanity Plus, and so
Apparel,
she is,
another one.
and Liz Parrish. Those are probably the two main figures.
But there's a half a dozen others who've worked closely on this. Yeah.
Well, as long as it's transhumanism still is kind of attached to basically science fiction, not in a bad way. Science fiction itself is dominated by men.
It is. We are very much paranoid conspiracy theory and science fiction obsessive adjacent as a community, and that does tend to. It's not necessarily.
Maybe women would be interested in things like pregnancy outside of the natural womb, things like issues like that. That Zoltan hits on.
Well,
that
that particular issue is sort of polarizing women actually. So,
well, I think that
a lot of women who thought about it.
Whatever people's culture shock at this notion.
Ex vivo.
I think I would describe it very much this phenomenon of artificial wombs as an extension, which I believe would be very much as a set of initiatives which would be very much an extension of women's liberation,
right,
and the liberation of humankind in many respects. I think of this is science fiction also, but I think of the Handmaid's Tale is a popular television series and a great book by Margaret Atwood. It describes an authoritarian theocracy which comes into being because of this problem of having children, not being able to have children. I think the opposite push of being able to have children in new ways would have very much the opposite effect: a more free society. And
more equal.
Yes, more free and equal.
More equality between the genders.
But you can always expect to see this kind of culture shock as with these things, and that's not necessarily a gendered concern.
I think super longevity. That's not a gender issue at all. I mean, the women should be all over that.
Well,
yeah.
I think.
I mean, this is my general feeling. Like I said, this is a problem that comes up in a lot of communities: the atheist community, skeptical community, rationalist community, libertarian community. That they're mainly dominated by men, and I think it's largely a historical curiosity. That I don't think it's because of rampant sexism in the community. There's some people who theorize that, but.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
right, but like if you look at like Scott Alexander's analysis of like just that issue with the libertarians, he shows that men and women tend to lean as demographics lean towards different political priorities, and women tend to as an electorate tend to lean towards compassion and restriction of vice, and a libertarian model that has free markets.
Right, I think there's something to that.
And legal vice.
There is something to that.
That's definitely a feature. I think it does owe a lot to this notion. The word transhumanism, it brings to mind these science fiction concepts. I'm also the chair of the United States Longevity Party, and those numbers are not precisely equal in terms of this gender, but it's less so. And I think there has been discussions with other organizations. Other transhumanist party organizations of changing, combining forces or changing the name of the United States Transhumanist and Longevity Party, for example, it creates a kind of internal logic. And the reason for something like that, I think, would be very much to try to get over that gap of people assuming that we're paranoiacs and science fiction obsessives. And that would very much help in bringing new people into the organization, not just more women, but a lot more people in general.
I don't see any paranoia so much. Are there people that are transhumanist paranoids?
It turned out when they some of these candidates that ran were sort of conspiracy theorists.
Yeah,
and the Transhumanist Party on Facebook, the hub for this party is.
But even changing the messaging,
the hub for this party is really the Facebook group. I encourage you to join if you're interested.
Yeah.
And it has seemed to attracted a lot of conspiracy theorists. Now, maybe that's just because they congregate online, but for whatever reason.
They're not, I mean,
But
they're,
the
they're smoked out pretty quick.
the
when
main
you ask
the
them
people
about
who are
science,
the people
you
who
know?
are actual members of transhumanism, established transhumanist figures, they are science men and women of
Right.
science. They're not
Right.
conspiracy theorists.
I mean-
but we are seeing a lot of those people come in. It's sort of a concern, but
And honestly, I'm not bothered by it. I think when you're talking about something like an AI takeoff, you're talking about these concerns. 80% of the concerns that people who would refer to transhumanists as Luciferians, 80%, maybe some significant percentage of those concerns are legitimate concerns. You'd have to be quite mad not to be a little bit concerned about problems from an AI takeoff or these related singularitarian effects. So I think that we have to kind of honor those people and their concerns. But again, I go back to the Zoltan Istvan effect. Zoltan Istvan, I think, was our true north in keeping people focused on longevity and keeping us from the needle from spinning wildly in the way that he described in the Transhumanist Party with in recent months with people of different ideologies and somewhat paranoid concerns kind of running the table a little bit. Yeah.
Do you think it's too late, or so longevity is the central issue for transhumanists?
AI or longevity is.
And it seems like longevity would rationally. It seems like everybody should be very interested in because they want to, cure all these other diseases that amount to being super longevity, if you could. And when is the DNC going to pick that issue up, or should we be pushed because there's such a wide gap between the Transhumanist Party going fully national with any kind of strength to speak of, and the DNC where it is, it's more than likely they're going to pick it up in the next 10 years. But
It is,
maybe
I believe, I agree.
Yeah.
I think,
Should they do it sooner than later? Should they do it at 2020? Should we be pounding
I think so. The
people
Democratic
like Yang
Longevity Caucus.
and other people, whoever the front runner
First,
ends up
we need to
being.
get Yang in the office, and the next stage is this.
I think they're more worried
Because you
about
definitely
equity
have
than
to
all
have the gradual, adoption of new ideas. I think,
Mm.
and he's the most technology sensitive.
And he is polling consistently second, or rather third or fourth in a lot of these polls, well above people who were tended to be more anointed candidates in the
He's
DNC.
one step towards your transhumanism.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it was a thing. It was
Yeah.
an interest in the more robust use of technology was something that was very much proved to be something that catapulted President Obama into office. So certainly taking those kinds of positions is never to anyone's detriment.
Should we be like three front runners are in their 70s in the DNC, and they don't seem to be worried about
The three
dying
of
in
them,
the
yeah.
next decade apparently, which they more than likely will.
Well, they should all be transhumanists.
Yeah, they should.
Because their life will
But
be
yes.
their life extension will be extended.
They should be more than anybody. They should have been thinking about this 20 years ago.
Yes.
Yet they haven't, and they're not thinking about it now. They should be labeled deathists,
Yeah.
and we should
So what's
The
the
broad society
question
is
is, should we,
deathist in the sense that we are
label them
acceptive of.
deathists.
The
We are
question is
acceptive
actually
of.
how to communicate the transhumanist idea to the general public.
It is,
That's
and it is a good
precisely-
question.
yeah,
How
that's
extreme
pre-
can we be in this?
That's
And
precisely
I think,
the problem.
I think for the population at large, my answer would be as extreme as you would like. But for the U.S. Transhumanist Party official messaging, we do want to measure that.
Yeah,
quite
I mean,
carefully.
one of the things we've done is we're no longer what I've been pushing is no longer talking about immortality. The term immortality gets is sort of very
polarizing?
well, it's sort of it's a
I think
very
it's a weasel word. It's
no,
not-
it's a
not-
very
it's not an actual thing.
It's mythical.
attention grabbing.
It sounds mythical.
Yeah, it's a very attention grabbing
There's no
term,
such
but
thing
it
as
sounds a little
invention
bit
for
kookish.
this conversation.
So we're using the frame,
You can still get
the
hit by a
phrase
bus.
super
Not
long.
anymore.
Right. What we're talking about is indefinite life extension, and so perhaps with a 1% chance of accident every year, you could live to 1,000. That's what we're really talking about. That's one thing that I've been pushing to make it more palatable to the general public. The other thing is we don't talk. Eliezer Yudkowsky, he talks about there being different shock levels So different levels of future shock.
We're going to be at a Less Wrong event tomorrow, by the way. If you'd like to
we're
come.
going to be doing another Q&A tomorrow, but you're welcome to come. But we're used to talking about these crazy topics like mind uploading, cryonics, and things like that.
Yeah, but I think
those are probably too much of a shock to your average audience.
Yeah.
So we're staying away from
life extension and digitalization.
Yeah, we're staying away from the really crazy stuff.
Geoengineering is kind of in that gray area.
But
what if you called it like preventative medicine? I mean, would that be might that be a way to sell it?
Yes, yes. It's a very good approach. And also just this messaging about how a life extension is ultimately going to be a lot cheaper as an institution than what we presently do. That's extremely powerful.
Well, what about spirituality and the sacred? Is there room for theists or even spiritual but not religious people within the Transhumanist Party?
Absolutely.
And are there ways you think that you could signal that?
Yeah. So I've organized one of these many panels that I described. One of them was a religious transhumanist panel. We had representatives from the Mormon Transhumanist Association, an incredibly smart group, the Christian Transhumanist Association, a Buddhist techno-optimist, myself representing a political position and also a universalist position. It was really a great talk. These people, this is the best that we can do in terms of these groups, is to encourage them to embrace these ideas like longer lifespans. There's nothing terribly controversial about it on its face. It's just that, and I think that the main barrier to this, aside from these institutional barriers, would be that people want to see it actually happen. People want to see folks living longer than 120. People want to, I believe when we start to see that, this deathist culture will fall away quite quickly. We didn't. I spoke to George. I know Dan. Let's quickly just go around and say our names. What's your name?
I'm Isaac.
Isaac. We said hello before.
Yeah, we said hello before.
Do you have anything you'd like to interject?
I actually sort of have two unrelated questions.
Yes.
I guess the one I'll start with is I'm aware that there was a transhumanist event in Rwanda recently.
Yes.
I'm wondering how did that go?
Yeah, so
that's still ongoing.
So there's
it's two.
What do you remember the name of it?
TAPS.
So
it's a techno-scientific conference.
Yeah.
In Rwanda, organized by some friends who I interviewed and gotten to know from Nigeria.
There's some people in Rwanda who've really gotten interested in the U.S. Transhumanist Party and transhumanism. And
a lot of
the chair of the party, Gennady Stolyarov, he's there at this conference. Tom Ross, who's the director of media, he's there.
Yeah.
The chair of the New York Transhumanist Party is there, Diana Delfer.
They went to Rwanda?
They're all in Rwanda.
They're all in Rwanda.
And this is actually, I was actually, if I had known about it, I might have actually gone because it's in the city of Kigali. And this city is actually quite advanced. I mean, it's actually it's turning into a tourist hub. And it's quite remarkable what they've accomplished there. And the what's going on in the African continent is very exciting because they can leapfrog a lot. They don't have a lot of the legacy technology. They can really leapfrog forward.
It's precisely what happened in Estonia. There wasn't a lot of lobbies. There wasn't a lot of natural predators that prevented them from pursuing this digitalization. It's the same kind of thing we were talking about, this data for all concept. Not having Verizon and other competitors there to slow that kind of thing generally.
Verizon has not rolled out IP version 6 on their FiOS service. I mean, I check every month. Every month I go in to search. Okay, any news on IP version 6? No, because we're Verizon, we don't have to change.
Very nice. All right, we're going to come back to you. Let's keep going. What's your name, sir?
Billy.
Billy, did you have any concerns or anything you'd like to interject? How are we feeling today?
I mean, I feel like there's not just revolution in technologies that are disruptive, but also we need to focus on stability as a goal, which means not pursuing disruption as much, and maybe for trying to understand exactly how a disruption is going to affect things before it happens in specific ways, and plan out what's going to happen, understand, like, just cultivate a better understanding of human psychology, human sociology, urban development, ecosystems, how ecosystems work, and try to be like, I think conservation is important, and that there is a kind of divide between conservationist goals and kind of transhumanist, accelerationist kind of goals, and I think it would be good to focus on ways to blend them together.
Yeah, I think when we reach that high level of post-industrial stability, that high level of life extensionism as in practice, that we can maybe afford to step back quite a bit from pushing as hardline AI takeoff advocates. I think we can afford to, but also at every step of that, we need to be using things like Ray Kurzweil presented on this subject, predictive algorithms and more advanced modeling to make sure, this came up in the conversation of geoengineering. So our climate advisor, he's advocated for, and others have, for putting iron into the oceans to generate algal blooms that will foment a great deal of ocean life. But this is not a foolproof plan. There's a couple of ways that could go wrong. So we need to, in anything of this kind, particularly as it relates to AI safety, we need to game it out. We need to model it. We need to be using predictive algorithms, which are very much becoming a part of our world, to decide what best practices might be. And everyone should have this level of skepticism.
You prioritize preventing the self from having to face certainty of death over like improving society in certain ways, like improving just like overall happiness or whatever.
Well, I think they're both features of human
development. That's a common misunderstanding that the focus is just on life extension. It's
doesn't
focused
need to
on
be false
health
choice.
span extension, meaning having extending life, the time you're alive, where you're happy and productive.
Yeah, I mean, because there's
some
technological development.
Some people may argue there's other priorities in the world, like curing, dealing with poverty and malnutrition and stuff. And we're not. All we're saying is we're not like neglecting those concerns. I mean, as a party specific to the U.S., we have to focus on the U.S. But most of the transhumanists I know are concerned about the entire world as a whole. And it can be quite altruistic. Common misconception of transhumanism is that it's very selfish.
Yeah, and that is an unfortunate mischaracterization, I think.
Because I see investing in the development of younger people as like more important than prolonging your own life. Like,
yes,
I definitely like. I mean, if you could return, if you could somehow, I feel like the main problem with death isn't the fact that you die as much as just the information of your memories is just lost, and that's a valuable resource for the society.
A tremendous loss of data occurring with every 110,000 people a day the world around are dying because from what are basically preventable.
It's basically like if. And every time someone gets a disease like Alzheimer's, they're losing their memory. It's just as much a tragedy as them dying.
So you think that being able to back up that data would be more important than being able for me to continue my stream of quality?
An understanding of the brains, of how the brain works, and being able to read the stuff contained in the brain. Like, I'd rather be cryonically frozen and have a machine read out like my life experiences than to consciously persist in the future. Because
does anyone else think that cryonics? I won't put my hand up. Does anyone else think that cryonics ultimately might be publicly funded? Is that something that we should be doing? Came up in one of the debates, and I said that by the standards of the day, that seemed quite mad.
I think that the
but-
future generations might look at the cryonically frozen bodies as being selfish if their goal is to just oh, I'm going to emerge in the future that all these other people have been working so hard to make it great, and I'm just going to reap the benefits of it in the future. And if I have all this money from putting it into the bank, and I'm gonna.
That's probably a post-scarcity
super
framework, so they might not
wealthy.
begrudge you those resources so much.
And they'll be like,
Hopefully.
screw you, we're just gonna turn you into our robot slaves.
We don't.
That's
we
a
don't.
great
We
idea.
don't. It's
That's very
probably
possible.
good that we don't focus on cryonics, because that is
Not
very
from-
much sort of
not
a
from public
selfish
spending perspective at this time.
It's being
endeavor.
leapfrogged anyway.
However,
Yeah,
you know,
it
it could be
It might very well.
it
come
could be
down to that
useful for future generations to revive some people from the past to get a better understanding of the past. So, but yeah, and anyway,
Tell me your name, sir.
Tom.
Tom.
Cherry.
Tom and Jerry. Okay, go on.
Well, I just recall seeing a couple of interviews recently. Like Bill Gates, they asked him what's his biggest fear is, and he said to not be able to think well. You know, like my ability to think degrades, like Alzheimer's or something. And I was like, that's really curious. A guy with $100 billion doesn't put two and two together and say, well, I want super longevity, so my brain is working well into the future. Seems obvious. You know?
There's a gap, but it's not entirely clear to the extent to which we'll have well span as we have a extended lifespan. But they do seem to be co-occurring pretty well, these advances there.
Yeah. And the other interview was with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Howard Stern, and the two were talking about dying. And Arnold said he was pissed off. He said he was pissed off that he's led this incredible life and it's just going to be over soon. You know? And Howard was like the same thing. He was like, yeah.